if you study the Quran, you'll notice that Allah talks a lot about animals, uh, domesticated animals. And one of the things that He mentions about domesticated animals is that He made them for us to be a form of transportation. He made them for us to ride. And that is a sign. There are many signs in that for humans. Signs of God's power, His lordship, His mercy, etc., etc. And the implication is that when you ride animals, it indicates you towards belief and towards being convinced in the reality of God and the reality of the afterlife. But the funny thing is, we don't really ride animals anymore. Maybe every once in a while, little kids ride ponies and stuff at petting zoos, and tourists ride horses, and things like that. Um, and maybe some very rich people own horses and they'll ride them as a recreational hobby and stuff. And maybe in some parts of the world there's still people who, ride donkeys and stuff like that, and horses as part of their daily grind. But for the most part, I think humans have abandoned the use of riding animals. And the question is, humans. The question becomes like, then what are we riding? Because if we're not riding animals, then how are we getting around? Because transportation is a constant human necessity throughout the generations and throughout time and throughout history. So if we're not riding the animals that Allah created for us, what are we riding? And of course, we all know the answer is that we're riding cars. We're riding mechanized vehicles. And it's funny because Allah doesn't mention those things in the Quran, not even hinting at them. And anywhere anywhere the Quran makes mention of them or hinting at them, it's actually to attack them and to warn us about them. And some people might say, oh well, there were no cars and stuff in the time of Prophet Muhammad, so when Allah was talking about transportation, He had to talk about things that people in those times were familiar with. But that's not very intelligent, because Allah could have just waited to send the Quran down in a time when there were mechanized vehicles. And then also, when people say that, they're kind of assuming that cars and animals are basically the same, but they're not. Cars are good for the environment, and animals are good for the environment. Cars are not good for the environment. Animals, the kind of animals that we ride, eat grass and vegetation, things that we ourselves can't eat, but which is in quite abundance in many parts of the world. Whereas cars cannot eat grass. They require either petroleum or electricity, and electricity itself, even when it's renewable and green, so-called, is also dependent on non-renewable resources, of which there's a limited supply. So, and then also, cars leak and exhale poison, whereas animals, you know, their waste product is actually good for the soil. I mean, you collect manure and you can use it to naturally fertilize farmlands and gardens and stuff. Whereas cars running around, they pollute the soil, they pollute the air, they pollute the water. And then also, animals give birth to more animals. Cars don't give birth to more cars. So animals, actually, the longer you have them over time, the more value increases. And there are many hadith about this, about poor people who were given, just a small number of animals, and then you come back in the story years later, and they've got a valley full of animals. Whereas that's not necessarily the case for for someone who has a car or something. And so cars don't give birth to more cars. Animals give birth to more animals. And then the comparisons go on. But basically, I think it's very foolish of us to assume or to make the claim that cars are the modern equivalent of animals, and that when Allah talks about animals as being a blessing in the Quran, that He's also including within that conversation cars. Allah is not stupid. I maintain that. I believe in that strongly. Whereas cars are such a stupid idea. And if you just like kind of study Allah's mind a little bit and kind of read His mind a little bit, which he's very open to us doing, we would see that he does not approve of cars. Cars are an idiotic invention, very destructive. They're more destructive than nuclear bombs, because cars are used every day, whereas nukes are not. Cars are mass produced and used on a massive scale, whereas nukes are not. So cars are far more destructive than anything else humans have ever invented, and they cannot and do not and should not replace beasts of burden, animals, livestock, domesticated animals. So we need to get back to the old ways. We need to get back to riding horses and stuff. Maybe our Muslim children would stop leaving Islam in such large numbers if they had grown up riding animals, not just for fun, not just for recreation, but as part of their daily life, taking care of animals, putting a saddle on a horse, combing a horse, brushing a horse, feeding an animal from its hand, from his hands, from her hands. You know, there's wisdom to having animals. It's not just the utilitarian thing of getting from point A to point B as fast as you can. So humans, please wake up. And Muslim scholars, again, shout out to you guys. Stop being stupid. Stop being lazy. You could say whatever you want about me, but for real, you Muslim scholars are not doing your job. You guys gotta speak out against these cars, and you gotta stop telling Muslims that they can go off and become engineers to design all these cars. We don't need our Muslim children to grow up building robots and machines. And then you Muslim scholars can't be accepting donations from these engineers, these nature killers, these enemies of Allah. All you engineers who are making Tarawih this Ramadan, shame on you, man. Come back to nature. And you scholars, please wake up, do something.